You don't need an office. You need an office. You don't need a shop. You need a shop. You don't need contractors. You need contractors. What your business doesn't need 1 month, it might need the next. So at O2, we're introducing data rollover, where you can automatically roll over your unused data to the next month when you might need it. Search O2 Business. We're here to help your business flex.
New or upgrading customers only on selected tariffs. 1 month rollover terms apply.
Already have a podcast? It's time to join Spreaker's monetization program, the easiest way to profit from your passion starting on day one. You decide which episodes and exactly where you want the ads to be inserted, and Spreaker takes care of the rest. If you're not on Spreaker, it's easy to import your podcast in just a few clicks, and then you can monetize your older episodes too. For 1 free month on a pro account, visit Spreaker.com/monetize. That's SPREAKER.com/monetize to join and start making money today.
Welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Concept Show. I'm your host, Paul Rook, and we are exclusive to the PA UK network. As always, we are joined by the stupendous Kerry and Richard. Hello, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
For you.
The stupendous Kerry Greenaway and the stupendous Richard
At Ring, we reinvented the doorbell. And now we're changing the way you look at whole home protection with Ring security cameras.
Wait, Ring does cameras too?
That's right. And they're so versatile, you can put them inside or outside, wherever you need them most.
Handy.
Ring cameras let you see, hear and speak to anyone inside or outside your home. And you can control them all from the Ring app to keep you and your family connected and protected.
Now that is smart.
Ring. Smart security made simple. Learn more at ring.com.
Elements are in the house.
In the house.
I'm still getting used to that illustrious title.
Oh, you might be, but I've well worn the edges of that one.
Well, I'm just getting the letterheads printed up with it on, so, so I'm just taking it easy at the moment. I don't want to rush it.
I've been using that wherever I've gone. Hi, I'm the stupendous Kerry Greenaway.
So what have you two been up to then this week?
You know what we've been up to.
Yeah, you do.
I know, so you could tell the listeners.
We've actually been out paranormal investigating, or ghost hunting, I think the expression should be. We've actually been out we've actually left our desks, we've left the internet alone, and we actually went out into the field, and we went to a very secret location called Kelvedon, secret nuclear bunker, and we went there for the evening. Public investigation, really great night, great bunch of people. We was able to go off sort of in our own little group, as well as the public doing their thing, with their leaders and stuff. Brilliant night. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I haven't had a night out investigating, obviously, because of the situation this year. So it was really refreshing to get out and into the field again. It was a brilliant night.
It was great. And in our little group, we had a couple of
I'm glad you enjoyed it, and especially with my team.
Well, there you go.
So big up Phoenix Paranormal.
I have to say, I will big up Phoenix, because considering the circumstance and all the extra measures that have to be put into place to paranormal investigate, we have to do bubbles of so we've done staggered entry. So you've got your bubble of investigations, as it were, and then you stuck to your bubble, and in the hub, every bubble had their own table, and we had to wear masks in the hub, obviously. But when you was out investigating, everyone stuck to their bubble and cleansed, and everybody was brilliant. All the guests were brilliant, very understanding about when they could wear their masks, when they couldn't. They had to clean after themselves. Do you know what I mean? Stuff like that. Everybody was so good, and it was so well. It was like a well-oiled machine, considering it was your first event out after, with all the restrictions in place. And it was a really, really interesting evening, and we got some really interesting things happen. great results on the Ouija board that were verified by people in the public group. Fantastic table tipping went on with verifiable information coming through. Although it felt very personal to the people in the group, didn't it, to be fair, rather than the location spirit, I would say. But yeah, it was a really interesting evening.
Yeah, I found it thoroughly enjoyable, and well, I don't think you can really go wrong with Kelvin and Hatch. It is sort of like an ideal location, and especially for the circumstances we are in and coming out of, it probably is one of the better locations actually out there to actually conduct an investigation with these restrictions in place.
How did it feel as a boss?
We did it really well, though.
Yeah, but how did it feel as a boss person with the restrictions? Because that's a lot of information, isn't it?
It was a lot of hard work to put it all together and make the plans. We just had like a meeting with the managers beforehand, just to ensure that everyone knew what they were doing and when they were supposed to be doing it. And it came off really well. I thought it was really good.
Yeah, I thought it went very smoothly.
Yeah, it's a lot of hard work behind the scenes, but they managed to put it off. I'm proud of the team. And if anyone does want, after that glowing report, if anyone does want to come out with us, the website is www.phoenixevents.info/paranormal.
Cool.
Yeah.
And you never know. You might see.
Nearly forgot it then.
You did, didn't you? Yeah. And you never know. Well, you'll definitely see Paul and
yes,
his psychic Lucy. You never know. You might meet me and Richard as well if you come along.
You never know. Yeah.
You never know.
No, we don't want to frighten them off. Too early.
I don't know. A bit early for
not
that.
straight away.
I had to put a warning out beforehand.
So in regards to...
It was really good. We got some really good activity in places, and yeah, as you said, some personal messages were given to some of the guests. So yeah, it was a good night, really good night.
Good night had by all.
So what did you make of some of the activity we got? Because as I say, I was part of a Ouija board experiment, which I have to say, a couple of people, the public, were a little reticent to go on the Ouija because they'd had bad experiences, generally generated from when they were younger, when they messed about with it when they were young. And then the education part comes in, and then, they got on the board, and that went really well. And actually, there was verifiable information came through. It was linked to one of the people. It was like a message for a person that was in the group, who wasn't actually on the Ouija board, funnily enough. And we was saying, right, point to who this is for. And it did. It pointed right to who it was for. It spelt the name out, spelt a year out. So it said the relationship that the person was for, and said, right, so we was like, well, what do you want to say? Just say, remember me, came out. And I thought that was absolutely astonishing, because the bloke was like, I don't know how that's happened. I don't know how, because we didn't know this bloke from Adam. He's a member of the public that booked through the website. So we don't know him. So none of the team could possibly have known this. I certainly didn't. I didn't meet that man before ever. And I was on the board. And I know two of the people were people, although they was part of the public, they weren't part of his group, if that makes sense, like his circle. So they wouldn't have known. And he was like, oh, my God, I've got to, go and tell my dad, and I'm sure my dad will verify it and stuff. So we're waiting to hear back on verification on that. But he was linked to, really interestingly, and this is a common mistake that a lot of people make with Kelvin and Hatch, he was actually linked with a war link going back to the Second World War. Right? Yeah. But Kelvin and Hatch isn't a war thing, it's civil service.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting to me that came through when a lot of people make that mistake about Kelvin and Hatch being a war thing.
I do think as well sometimes that you bring the spirits with you, and especially if they've got the war link. I mean, let's face it, most grandparents and great-grandparents have got that link.
Yeah.
But I think when obviously they come through because they know that you're going for a ghost hunt and you want the spiritual contact. And that's a point of contact that they can make as well.
Yeah, that's that's an interesting sort of idea. I mean, there's always good activity at Kelvin Hatch, and it could point to many sort of explanations or theories. But because of the sheer breadth of interaction and encounters you get there, which aren't sort of really associated with the actual bunker itself, so it certainly sort of, and for me, sort of points to more towards sort of bringing stuff along with you, or perhaps the area itself is more attuned to access, if such a thing is possible, from the world beyond, like a portal or something like that.
It definitely is. It is a very interesting location because various levels we were hitting different things, and I've said it 100 times. I'm not a medium. I pick up spirits generally, but I can pick up energy, and some of the energy I was picking up, a person who is an incredibly strong medium, comes up with good, verifiable, credible info when she does readings, was picking up the same thing. And she goes, "You're open." And I was like, "Yeah." And she goes, "I can feel you. I can feel that you've opened." And those things fascinate me. And the tunnel, there's a really long tunnel. And last time we were there, we got a hit at a certain point. And we were interested to see if we were going to get the same hit, a dowsing hit this was. And we got the same dowsing hit in the same spot. We so need to go back in the day and have a look at up the top of where we get the hit to see if there's a water source or something above ground that is causing that to happen. But even somebody who was totally a total novice at dowsing got it in the same spot, didn't he?
Yeah. I sort of went down and re-dowsed the area, got the hit in the same place, and then sort of Daryl went down and he got a hit in the same place with his first ever sort of real field sort of investigation with dowsing rods. So that was quite telling, I thought. Plus, I was sort of speaking beforehand, sort of privately, with a few friends on the internet, and through messages saying I was going and I was getting lots of things of what to look out for and stuff. And the thing with ley lines came up, and someone sort of got a sense of ley lines at the location I was actually going to go to. And I sort of spoke about this to someone else, and she said yes, and I got that there as well, but I won't tell you where it is. So I thought, oh, okay. So I go down and sort of went around, done my dowsing experiments, came back and said, "Is it in the tunnel?" And she came back and said yes. So there was lots of sort of segues out of going to this. It was very interesting.
It is. It's a really interesting location. If you get a chance to do it, it's definitely one I would recommend doing. It's a lovely location in itself, to be fair. And in these times where the location is so important because you've got so many other restrictions and measures to put in place, you've got to get the location that's able to manage that. And I would say Kelvin and Hatch is a good one to do, because you've got 3 levels. You can split your public group into 3 section bubbles. And keep your bubbles, you know what I mean, and put those restrictions in place. Yeah, I think it's a really good little location, and that's not that little, is it? But, it's a really good location. But, no, well done, Paul. That's all I'm going to say. A little clap for you there, because you did a fantastic job. And I know you were nervous because it was your first event coming out of COVID. So, well done to the team.
Yeah, I can't take all the credit, though. Most of it was the team. So I'll pass that on. Definitely.
Yeah, no, I had a fantastic night. It was really good. And I got myself a little skull there. They had a beautiful little amethyst skull in the gift shop. And, me and Crystal's boys, I couldn't resist it. Cannot resist it. And it was calling to me, as you do. So I was like, Daryl, can I have some money, please? And he was like,
only £75.
It was £500. Yeah. And so I acquired a new skull. Absolutely fascinating skulls in their own right. And this is the topic of tonight's show, or today's show, should I say. Is we're talking about skulls, because skulls in themselves are very evocative. They're very emotional, aren't they, when you view a skull? And you can get all types of skulls out there. You can get real human skulls. And if you go over to Phoenix, they've got an event coming up, which, trust me, this location is one you would not want to miss. It's a shop, but it's an occult shop. And they have lots of bits of people.
And I can testify for that. I went down and done the recce for Paul about a month or so ago, and yes, the merchandise, well, the curios he has in the shop are curious, to say the least.
Very much so. But he has a lot of real human skulls. Now, real human skulls, they're very evocative, aren't they? They're very emotive to look at. It's a real weird thing when you view a human skull, right, guys?
Yes, they seem to be of all, you will always recognise a skull, and that's sort of like it's one. It sort of seems to be one, whereas any other sort of human remains, and let's face it, it is a human remain, are sort of bits, you say, well, that's just a thigh bone, that's just a hip bone or something, but you look at a skull and you do seem to have a connection with it straight away. Well, certainly I do. You seem to recognise it.
Yeah, absolutely. It is one of the human bones that are like instantly recognisable. I just find them so fascinating anyway, because obviously in the medical field that I'm in, just anything human related, I find fascinating. I've even watched one of the autopsies where they were actually autopsying the brain, I think it was, and you got an inside glimpse into what its skull's like from the inside, as opposed to the outer side of it. And it's really amazing that the human body is absolutely fascinating.
It's an incredible piece of biological machinery, isn't it? The human body.
It is. Absolutely, and it is literally what holds you up. If you didn't have it, you'd just be a jellified mess on the floor.
I think when you view skulls, and let's face it, and we've all got one as well, so
hopefully
it's basically where we live as well, isn't it?
Yeah, all of our...
I mean, it does. It tells a story as well.
Yeah, everything happens there, doesn't it, in your brain? Your emotions, your intelligence, your consciousness, everything generates from there. And all the signals it sends to the rest of the body come from that one area. You know, and it's although we know a lot, there's a hell of a lot we don't know about the brain side of it. They know a bit more than they used to, I suppose. But there's still a lot they don't know, isn't there, about things in the brain and how it interacts and works with stuff. So it is an absolutely fascinating... A vessel, the skull.
Yes.
For all of that activity that goes on.
I think, and as you said, Kerry, we still don't know a lot about sort of like the mechanics of the brain, but at least with the skull, you have the vessel of it, where it's all carried and stuff, which I find quite fascinating.
And crime as well. They used to look at the skull. We found this out when we investigated, a few years ago now, the True Crime Museum. There's a thing called phrenology where they look at the bumps and the formation of the features and stuff, and they thought that they could work out psychopathic traits and character traits from bumps and lumps and formations of the skull, didn't they?
Yeah, that's right. And I believe there's even are there psychic readings you can do by looking at people's heads and feeling them as well.
Yeah. So it's a fascinating topic. Marley's agreeing or not agreeing.
Of course.
Not quite sure which way round he's going with this one. Or maybe it's just the topic of skulls he's not too happy about.
Or it's a bone and he's quite excited.
And when you go, if you want to buy a real human skull, they're loads of money. They're not cheap.
No.
They're loads and loads of money if you want to get your hands on a real live and kicking human skull, as they say. Now, we actually in the UK have something that is very unique to the UK, which is the myth. I'm going to call it a myth because I've never actually encountered one myself, of a screaming skull. It's really unique to the UK.
Yeah, I sort of noticed this, and I found it actually quite interesting, and there are about sort of 7 or 8 still sort of active sort of cases of screaming skulls in the
So
UK.
tempting. Well, basically, a screaming skull is basically somebody who has an attachment to a property, and then if you remove the skull from the property, then all sorts of hell breaks loose. Basically, massive poltergeist activities or audible screams are heard, which is hence the name screaming skull. And there are cases of this still around, where the skulls are still in situ because to remove them it's caused so much trouble. Tempting, so tempting to go to one of the properties, remove the skull just to see the activity, if there is any, or whether or not it is just a myth, an urban legend type thing. But there are stories of this around the UK, and this is one of the ones.
I've actually been close to a location that's said to have a screaming skull, and it's in Kent, a place called Reculver Towers, and it's like an old Roman church. And all that remains now of this church is just 2 towers and a bit in between. And it said that when archaeologists dug around the place, they found children's skulls. And obviously they removed them and put them into another church, consecrated ground, and gave them a proper burial. But it said that you can still hear the screams coming from the church. Looking at it logically, it's on a big hill. You've got lots of wind around, and I think the towers act as almost like a whistle, almost. So I think when the strong winds are up, it creates like this sound that's more like screaming.
Yeah, we actually visited there, didn't we, Paul, on a road trip, and that was a windy day. I must admit, I was going round. Not that I heard any screaming as such, but I can see, it is very prominent, right high on top of a cliff. So,
and at the bottom there was a caravan park, and I used to have a caravan there, so you know that site very well.
But that's a fair point, though, isn't it? It could be a leap of assumption because when one of my windows has actually got like a crack in the seal, and if the wind hits at a certain time, it does give it a sort of like ooh kind of noise that comes through, and we know what it is, so we know it's not. But if you had an old property with this myth and legend surrounding it, it is an assumption that you could put on it that it's the skull. It's the skull talking. It's not. It's the wind through the seal in the window, or like you said, the acoustics could be going through a crack, causing a noise that is a weird, different noise in the towers. It could be that has built the legend up around this situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's take a look at a couple of these screaming skull tales because they're fascinating in their own right. To be fair. So first of all, we're going down to Dorset. We're heading all the way down south to Dorset, to a place called Bettiscombe Manor. It's a beautiful property. It's a manor house.
I bet that's nice there.
Yeah, lovely part of the world, Dorset.
It is actually a beautiful part of the world. Now, there are different versions of this story. You can find different versions of this out there. So we'll go with a couple that we found. Frederick Pinney. Right, lived in Bettiscombe Manor, was banished to the West Indies in 1685. Something to do with the English Civil War, but he managed to come back to the UK, and he brought with him an African slave.
Yeah.
Right, not very happy, didn't survive very long, but his dying wish was that his body was returned to his native land. Right, obviously he's not going to be very happy. He's an African slave that's been taken away from his country into this cold, horrible, rainy, miserable, although very beautiful country as a slave. I mean, come on, he's not going to be very happy, is he? And obviously his dying wish was to be returned to his native land. Well, let's not going to bother with that because he's a slave at the end of the day, right?
Yep.
So he wasn't done. That wasn't done. He was buried in the local churchyard. Now, immediately after he got buried, groans and other terrifying noises were said to be coming from the grave. Now, John was forced to remove the corpse from the grave, and then he stored, as you do, he stored it in the attic. Now, obviously, over time, the body crumbled and deteriorated, and then all that was left was the skull. Right, so this is where the skull comes from. Now, many attempts have been made to remove the skull. It's been thrown into a pond. It's been, all sorts of ways and means of removing the skull have been tried. But every time that they do, They get screams and groans. Are you all right there? Are you going to finish the story for me, or are you going to just be quiet? Anyway, screams and groans have been heard in the house, so they've dug the skull back up and brought it back to the house, and apparently the activity stops.
Right.
But in 1963, the skull was allegedly examined by a pathologist. A pathologist, that's the right word. And it was determined that the skull was actually between 3,000 and 4,000 years old, and actually from a European woman. So that doesn't hold water with the African slave story at all.
No. It's odd. I mean, the first part of the story is plausible. When he was sent to the West Indies after the English Civil War, a lot of people were, especially royalists, who were defeated. A lot of prominent landowners who didn't sort of fall in with the new regime were deported basically to the West Indies, and some of them did come back during the Restoration, and quite possibly would have brought back some of the servants and slaves with them. That part of the story is actually quite plausible, but then as it goes down, it sort of falls into a more sort of a legend type sort of scenario, which sort of seems to crop up. I mean, a lot of these tales of screaming skulls do tend to follow a certain narrative.
Yeah, I think the other thing to consider is not far from that manor house is a place called Pilsden Pen, which was an Iron Age ritual site, apparently.
Yeah.
So they think the skull could possibly have come from there. So maybe, throwing it out there, devil's advocate and all that, maybe the African slave skull thing is a true part of the tale.
Yeah.
And then when they tried to get rid of it once, and then they had activity, they found a skull, thought, oh, there's the skull, and it wasn't the right skull. Who knows? I mean, it's one of those, isn't it?
It could be one of those stories that, they wanted people to keep away from the house because it was attributed to smuggling.
Yeah, possibly.
Well, yeah, that is quite a common sort of thread we find when we're sort of like looking into legends, especially around coastal areas. I'm not too sure how close this manor is to the coast, but if it is, yeah, it's quite a possible explanation for the tale.
But it's still there. They've left the skull in situ. But the guy who looked at this, I found this in an article by the writer was John Simmons. And the article is Proceedings of the Dorset Natural History and Archaeological Society. This is in 1910. And he went and looked at the skull and whatnot, but does say that where it's kept in the attic, it's not a very good attic. It's it's unsound, it's unsafe. It's had bats and owls and all sorts of foul up there. You can imagine it's probably like really bad. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's quite a dilapidated roof. So, if you're talking about, first of all, by now, if it's that dilapidated up there, to get to the skull is probably quite a tricky. It's easier just to leave it where it is. And secondly, any activity that happens around there, you can't then discount that it's actually not actually paranormal, that it could well be something else. You know what I mean? And who knows? I don't know. It's one of those, isn't it?
Yeah, it's sort of, it's 6 of one and half dozen of the other. You could sort of like, you can make a blanket statement saying, well, it's stated that the loft was full of all sorts of bats, pigeons and stuff like that, and sort of just make a sweeping statement and say, that's what it is. That's what's causing the noise. Or you can look somewhere else for it. But I generally think there was a skull in situ. It was probably a curio, which a lot were collected back in the day by people, and probably a local curio at that. And a story was sort of overlaid on top of it over time.
Yeah, because I think it's one of those that you'll probably find certain threads, like you said, were right. You know what I mean? But whether or not the activity is right, it's a very old house. It's got a lot of history.
Yeah.
To it, Bettiscombe Manor in itself, it's a fantastic property, and it's had lots of different owners, and it's had lots of different stories, and the whole area what with the ritual area, the Iron Age ritual area,
Mm-hmm.
you can understand, can't you, how sort of like a story builds up around it, but it doesn't change the fact that it's a really interesting tale, and one of
It is,
those
yeah.
unexplained, very rare little typical UK ghost story kind of tale, isn't it?
It has all the elements in it, and I love it. It just, it's folklore, isn't it? It is good folklore,
Yeah.
prime English folklore.
I would still love to go to Bettiscombe Manor and actually see it for myself.
Oh, of course.
And take it out of situ if you could, and see if the activity
Yeah.
did happen. That would
Take
be
it down the
awesome.
road a bit.
Yeah, just put it outside the door and see what happens. That would be awesome. There is another very famous case. That's the Burton Agnes Hall. Now, Burton Agnes Hall is, again, this is all around the same sort of time period. The lady, Catherine Griffith, died at Burton Agnes Hall in 1620 and is actually reputed to haunt the Queen's state bedroom.
And what colour she is? Is she a white lady, a blue lady, a
I
grey
don't
lady?
know. I don't know.
Yellow lady.
Yeah, who knows?
Who knows?
Everyone.
Well, the story goes that Anne has watched the building of the new house and can talk of nothing more than that. It was the most beautiful house ever built. And then when it was finished, Anne went for one afternoon to visit St. Quintin's at Harpham. This is so posh, isn't it? St. Quintin's at Harpham. Oh, my new house. Talk about my new house that I'm having built. It's going to be the most beautiful house in the UK. But that's about a mile away and near St. John's Well. Now, she was attacked and robbed by ruffians, and she was brought home to the Burton Agnes, but was actually so badly hurt that she died a few days later. But, of course, let's remember, in the 1620s, us girls were a little bit more nervy, I suppose, than we were then. And,
More prone to hysteria.
We died of just like, oh,
Yeah.
oh dear. Anyway, throughout this period of time where she was recuperating before she died, she was delirious, sometimes sensible, so she was in and out of consciousness by the sounds of it. And she told her sisters that she would never rest unless part of her could remain in our beautiful home as long as it shall last.
Oh, I think I see where this is going.
And she made them promise that when she was dead, her head should be severed and preserved in the hall forever. And to pacify her, they agreed. Of course they did. She was on her deathbed, for God's sake.
Yeah.
She's delirious. Just agree with her.
Just agree with her. It's fine. And then behind, like, when they left the bedroom, going, did you hear what she just said? She was sever her head. We're girls. We don't do things like that. Anyway, she died. They buried her in the churchyard. Thought, yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Right in America.
Oh, dear. But no, they actually had to sever the head and bring it to the house, because after that, they had so much trouble in the house that they decided to exhume, sever,
Just
bring
do
the
it.
head in. And then every time that they've tried to remove the skull, hell breaks out.
Right.
Tremendous noise, upheaval, all sorts of stuff goes on. But what's happened is they put it into the walls of the house. So you can't view it, it's in one of the walls. And nobody knows for sure just where that is.
All right. So it sounds like she was more trouble dead than when she was alive.
Yeah.
It definitely does sound like that, although who knows, right?
Hmm.
But wouldn't it be interesting to go to Burton Agnes and see if you could, like, locate... How great would it be if you could go, find, or, do a psychometry type big experiment with lots of different psychics, see if you can pinpoint where they think that is, and actually be allowed to actually have a look, like knock a hole in the wall or something.
I very much doubt they'll let you do that, but it'd be interesting. I'll grant you that.
It would be, wouldn't it? Now, as I said, they think it's in the Great Hall. They think that's where it is, but they don't know for sure.
Right.
So whether or not a record, there must be a record, or there must have been a record somewhere at the time, but we're talking 1620s, a lot's happened since then, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it would be fascinating, absolutely fascinating experiment if you could do that. But again, because we can't verify it, because we don't know for sure, it's a lovely story, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
And again, sort of, a few elements from the first story we encountered, sort of, just someone not at peace because the skull is not in its right place, involving like a manor house and stuff like that. Interesting.
Absolutely fascinating. Now, in 1996, David Clarke actually did a record of English. Well, they call them guardian skulls rather than screaming skulls. He classed them as guardian skulls because this is another thing with skulls, is that they're supposed to be guardians. So they look after a property. So if you take them away from the property, or hell breaks loose until they come back, so they can carry on with their guardianship duties. Right? He recorded 32 guardian skulls, and a lot were missing. So when he was like researching them to see if they were still in situ or whatnot, some of them he was like, "There's nothing now. Don't know what's happened to that, or the property's not there anymore, or whatever it be." 7 of those, including the Bert and Agnes skull, had been walled up, and 10 remained on display.
Okay.
So
interesting.
Out of 32,
walled up.
Yeah, out of 32, 17 can be accounted for.
Yeah.
Ish.
Mm-hmm.
Although I would argue that, because although you can account for them, you can't prove it because you don't know for sure, right?
No. You've only got the ones you can actually see and physically sort of go and visit. I mean, the ones that are alleged to be walled up are just that, really, sort of anecdotal stories at best.
Isn't there a famous skull that's, head? Who is it? It's one of the famous people that's in a wall somewhere that you can... It's like
Oliver Cromwell.
That's him. Well done, Richard. You saw exactly where my brain went there. Where's that? Can you remember where that is?
That's in one of the Cambridge universities, I believe. It was. He was actually posthumously executed because after the restoration of the monarchy, they actually went and dug him up and hung, drew and quartered him and cut his head off and put it on a spike above Tower Bridge. And it stayed there for quite a while, about 20 years, I believe, until it blew down one night in a storm. And somebody actually retrieved it, and it sort of went on its travels. It passed through various ownerships, and it actually ended up with, I believe, an academic at one of the universities at Cambridge who sort of gave it a solemn sort of like burial in one of the walls, and to this day you can actually still go and see the actual plaque on the wall where his head is behind.
So you can't actually see his skull?
As far as I'm aware, no.
Oh.
But it is of all sort of like the heads that are alleged buried in places, that is very well documented, and it is known about. That is certified as actually being true.
Wow.
Interesting.
But there's no sort of paranormal activity or anything like that connected with it. It was just somebody retrieved his head and
Shoved it in a hole in the wall.
Yeah, and sort of thought he deserved a bit of a tyrant, but he deserved at least. I think he went to Cambridge University. I think that's where the connection is. I think it was the college he actually went to when he was a young lad.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, look, there's Ollie's skull. Back to Ollie. We keep coming back to Ollie, don't we?
Well, they would have, when they sort of quartered people and cut them off, they would have dipped them all in tar, so it would have preserved it. That's so.
Oh, it's not quite so lucky.
Yeah, that was handy.
Yeah. Did he still have hair?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe it was still quite unrecognisable as Oliver Cromwell, because he did have a few warts, and I believe they're still sort of identifiable on his head.
Well, he should have used a potato.
He should have used a potato at a full moon and buried it like I did.
Yes, which did get rid of your wart.
Yeah, funny enough, it did.
Yeah, there you go. Ha ha.
The witchcraft there I told you about.
Well, there you go.
That was one night on one of our many discussions that we have, and it worked, everybody. All we're saying. But that's a whole different topic. So I can understand why you would want to put it in a wall, because, let's be fair, the skull of your sister, in regard to the Bert and Agnes skull, you wouldn't really want that out on display. So put it in the wall, get it out of sight, calms the activity down. She's got what she wanted in death. We've fulfilled her dying wish. Put it in the wall. She'll forever be there. No one needs to know. done, right? So I can understand why people would put them in the walls rather than having them out on display.
Yeah.
Yes, this also harks to sort of people putting talismans and stuff around sort of thresholds and in sort of fire hearths and stuff, doesn't it? And I believe skulls were actually used for that as well, to ward off evil spirits. So there could be a connection to that.
It is about protecting your space, isn't it? Your home space, where you live and your family are. It's about that protection from the unseen forces. And various times, this is very going pagan witchcrafty, isn't it? Back into deer folklore and all that. They would honour those spirits. They would do things to worship them and honour them and to keep them happy, basically, so that they didn't disrupt your home. And also put protections in place around so no evil spirit could enter any unwanted spirit. So, yeah, things like, that's why we see mummified cats and spell bottles and stuff like that still being found in old properties when they've renovated them or knocked them down to build something new. We see that quite, even to this day. I think locally they knocked down a really old, it was a hotel, but it was an old hotel, but there had been an older property there before. And when they were renovating that, knocking it down to build apartments, they found something there. And they were like, even now, the builders were like, what do we do? They called the archaeologists in, obviously, what do we do? And the archaeologist said, can you leave it where it is? Because the superstition of removing that is still prevalent, believe it or not. Because this theory of it's called a genus loci, guardian spirit of an area or a space, is still very prevalent in a lot of places.
Yeah, hang on, Paul, she's gone all witchy on us.
It is. I haven't got a witch on you. It's very prevalent, and it's basically a god or a spirit of a place and they would have been worshipped over the years. We see this with like waterworks, like ponds and sacred pools and stuff like that, don't we? There's one near not Glastonbury. Yeah, Glastonbury.
Yeah. There's
one near there. There's loads of them around the UK that you can go. And over time, they got built into like little grottos or, shrines. That's the word I was searching for. Thank you, Richard. And it's all because of this guardian spirit of the place. And the waters there are supposed to be very healing.
Yeah, and it's not a huge sort of leap of imagination if these sort of sacred wells do go back to the far midst of time, that the people that originally dedicated them would have sort of buried artifacts around them to perhaps consecrate them or something like that. So again, this is probably where these sort of stories come from.
Very much so. Very much so. And also, don't forget liminal places as well, which is basically a boundary place. And liminal places can occur everywhere. Between where nature changes from, like you see it on the shoreline, you see it on thresholds, is a liminal place. Anywhere where you're crossing from one location into another or one element into another. These are called liminal places. And that is sort of where they say it's very thin. The boundary between realms is very thin and is entry points for spirit, effectively.
Yeah, that's something I always noticed doing my dowsing. I mean, doorways are a bit of a pain, actually, because every time you go through them, your dowsing rods will cross. But it's just sort of like, even the most mundane of buildings, I find they do it. So there's certainly something behind that.
It's a crossing point, isn't it?
Yeah. Even if it's from your kitchen to your hallway or something like that. I mean, I do it and around my flat and every time.
So, when we talk about the skulls that are out on display, you'll generally find them facing doors, on windowsills, hearths, in rafters, those liminal places.
Yeah, sort of like they're the horizons of the mind, aren't they? They're the distant sort of places you see on the horizon, and you can walk closer and closer, but you never quite get to it.
And how many churches and stuff that we see that are built out of bones?
Well, yeah, there are a few.
There's quite a lot of them as well, isn't there?
Ones with ossuaries.
Ossuaries.
ossuaries attached. They're sort of, and these are sort of quite shrouded in a bit of mystery as well. And sort of like the most famous ones. Well, the most famous one, and obviously, is like the Paris catacombs. But although it's not a church, but but we do have a couple here in the UK which you can actually visit. There's one down in Kent in Hythe, which I'm planning to visit hopefully soon. I believe they've lifted their restrictions, so you can actually go down and visit.
And the Paris catacombs is a well-known place that has been investigated, and there's been weird stuff happen down there, right, Paul?
Yeah, loads of stuff. There was a team quite recently that's gone down there, haven't they?
I'm not too sure. I mean, I don't know whether they allow investigations per se, because I think the bit the public are allowed in is just a very small bit. It's basically the entrance and a few hundred yards in, but the actual catacombs themselves are very extensive by all accounts.
Yeah. I've always wanted to go down there.
Yeah.
It's...
I know it goes on a lot further than what you see as a public, the public. I mean,
Yeah.
you go down there, there's a restaurant down there, there's a cinema down there, and there's all sorts of things down there, isn't there? but the tunnels themselves go actually a long way out underneath Paris itself. And the bone bit is sort of like the touristy bit, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I think the tunnels are old sort of mining workings, whether for chalk or something like that. And I think particularly through the Middle Ages and stuff, I mean, church grounds...
It was limestone, wasn't it?
Oh, right, yeah. But church grounds were very, restricted, and it was just a way of recycling burial plots. You'd bury someone, leave them until they decayed, and go and dig their bones up, store them in the catacombs, so you'll free up space in your graveyards and stuff. And particularly sort of after plagues and stuff like that, there was sort of like a huge need for people to be buried on, and obviously, and particularly, and it was very important for anyone to be buried on consecrated ground.
Because the belief system...
Yeah. So they would bury you on consecrated ground, and I believe the belief is once you decayed, that was good enough so they could remove your bones and put someone else there.
That changed, didn't it? Because they ran out of... Well, I know in the UK they ran out of space, particularly in London. There was an epidemic of some form, and they ran out of space and they had to go out. And they built the great cemeteries outside, and Highgate is one of them. And oh God, racking my brains on this one because we've gone off topic a little bit. But they did the 7 great cemeteries outside of London, which leads into the Necropolis Railway, which is a whole different topic. But
that's another show.
That's a different show. But in that time, they recognised that because they're running out of space for burial, they had to come up with an alternative option.
Well,
cremation became more acceptable.
Yeah, this is sort of like the needs drive it, don't they? I mean, this was the start. The Victorians really sort of put in the municipal sort of graveyard. I mean, you would have a chapel attached. That would be your consecrated part. So you'd get over the consecrated, but you would actually acquire huge tracts of land just specifically for burials.
Going back to the screaming skulls, it was interesting when we was looking at particularly the 2 cases we've looked at today. The era, it was the 16th century.
Yeah, I was looking at that, and I've sort of got a sort of like a little sort of theory. I mean, the 16th and 17th century, that was a great sort of era, sort of Renaissance time, and people were dabbling in sort of like the dark arts, and I think acquiring sort of human body parts really started to take off. And I'm sort of wondering whether, sort of someone that would acquire like a skull would sort of make up a cover story for why they had it whilst they were doing their, I don't know, necromancy or something like that. But that's just a little sort of side note.
Possibly. But also around that time, you've also got to consider that mortality and life became very fundamental to them. They would look at mortality, and we all have to die, don't we? At the end of the day, that is one sure thing in life. They say there are two sure things in life: taxes and death. So is it coming to understand that the process of death? You know, that if you look at the literature and stuff like that around at that time, there's a lot of death and dying in them. I mean, I know it was like a very mortality rate was very. You was quite young when you died, relatively to what we do now.
I'm also sort of thinking, just off the top of my head, the 17th century was sort of like a crossing point. It was sort of like the birth of the modern era. It's when sort of people were exploring science and were finding out more, but you still had the spectre of death was still quite close, whereas in the Middle Ages, I mean, death was part of life and it was pretty much accepted. But during the 17th century, there was a possibility perhaps you could live longer and stuff, you know, if you sort of studied and sort of were quite knowledgeable. But there was always the spectre of, say, pestilence could just take it away. You know, I mean, again, and I look upon that as a liminal point in history, perhaps.
I think the Victorians were quite into it even more so, weren't they? So I think maybe that's sort of where it grew, and then the Victorians took over with the whole the photographs. You know, when they used to do the death photographs, because they believed the photograph would capture the soul.
Yeah, there's certainly, you know, during the Victorian era, I mean, a lot of things were fashionable, and death was not sort of excluded from the fashionista. You know, there was a huge sort of industry around it.
Well, it wasn't that because Albert died and Victoria went into mourning, and everybody sort of took on that mourning, and spiritualism at that time really took off as well. You know, parlour games and stuff like that really took off at the same time. Victorian era was very macabre, actually, when you look at some of the symbology, and the skull is actually one of the most powerful symbols, and was very much involved in that as well.
Well, yeah, you only have to look at some of the sort of mausoleums around cemeteries like Highgate to get that impression. Yeah,
definitely. I have to say, though, angels in graveyards freak me out now since Doctor Who. All I'm saying. I was fine with them until Doctor Who.
There's your segue,
I went to the exhibition with, who was the Doctor then? The old fella, Peter Capaldi.
Oh, right.
And as you go around, there's a section with the angels, and you have to collect a crystal that's in one of the angels' hands, and because there's like animatronics and stuff, you just think that it's going to grab you. Grab the crystal. And they were like, you know, can we have a brave volunteer to go and grab this crystal? And like everyone's like, no.
It can have the crystal, everybody.
Yeah.
But it shows, doesn't it?
Yeah, you just go around going, well, I'm not really that bothered.
Yeah, I can buy one in the gift shop, it's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
But it kind of, the skull itself, I mean, we've gone on to angels, that particular one. They're in Black Gang China as well. I decided to point that out. I was like, oh my God, they've got angels here. I'm moving on quickly.
Even the Isle of Wight's not safe.
No, not from them angels. Anyway, going back to skulls. They do invoke, when you look at skulls, caution and fear, don't they?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think one of the most iconic sort of symbols of a skull would be the skull and crossbones, you know, the old sort of like traditional pirate flag. But you look into the symbology of that, it's not as macabre as what it sort of like appears to be. I mean, that is sort of like a Masonic symbol. And I think, you know, the skull, obviously, I think, and represents wisdom, and the crossbones and does represent something else. I'm not too sure what exactly.
Yeah, I can't remember what the bones were for, but the skull is supposed to be the head of St. John the Baptist.
Yeah.
Going back to relics.
Well,
that goes back to the Knights Templar.
Yeah, and particularly, and if you think about it, sort of like you look at old traditions of skulls, folklore and stuff, there's a thing of skulls, and the relics, which involve skulls, it's just the church's acceptance of sort of skull worship, isn't it, in certain areas. So it's a very old tradition which has survived throughout the centuries and has been adapted to various belief systems that have evolved.
Very much so. It is a weird one, isn't it, when you think about it? You know, you're taking a head of a person,
well, yeah,
and worshipping it or ritualizing that in a funny kind of way, or showing it reverence, because even if it's a screaming skull that's, you know, if you don't take it out of the property, there's a fear there. Caution, you're going to get, you know, unexplained activity, and the skull's got to remain in place. But also, it's like a guardian of the place as well. It's like not a negative thing, even though there's that fear and caution that's linked to it. It's a very strange. It is a very strange thing. You can look at this from so many different angles, and the symbology of the skull is just crazy when you think about it. You can look at it in so many different ways. You've only got to look at the festival of the Dead. I can't remember what it's called in Mexico.
Yeah,
Festival of the Dead, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is the Festival of the Dead.
Yeah, it's called Murta something or other, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, made famous by Bond, wasn't it?
Oh,
Yeah.
that was the best opening sequence of Bond ever.
Funny enough, and that was on my Facebook feed as well this morning.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Spooky.
Yeah, some spooky coincidences. And my image of the day was the platform of skulls at Chichen Itza in Mexico. So, there's all these little links coming in.
The Dia de Muertos, that's what it's called, Day of the Dead.
Well done.
That's what that's called. Sorry, I knew it would come to me. Because it is just so evocative when you think about, even just that, just think about that opening sequence with all the, you know, with the bones and the skulls and that. It's very evocative of a celebration to do with, you know, your relatives, your ancestry is a representation of your ancestry in, you know, okay, so we're taking the bone part of it, but that is it, the essential part of acknowledgement of your ancestry, and that they are still the things that they did in life still need to be revered and acknowledged, and that they still have influence now. Yeah.
And I think another thing with a skull, you look at a skull and you know exactly what it is. It can't be anything else. But you look at other parts of the human sort of skeleton and stuff like that, you know. It could be anything, you know. There's no sort of personal sort of touch there. They're just a pile of bones. But the skull, you know, holds, you know, you can definitely tell that was someone, you know, at one time.
Well,
it can tell quite a big story as well about the person that it belonged to, like their diets in particular, whether they were meat eater or herbivore, even down to how they died. Did you get cracks in it and something?
Well, yeah,
you know. I mean, I know you can get that with the rest of the bones as well, but yeah, I mean, you can even tell whether they've got like gum disease and other issues with their teeth, and it's not just a skull; it's so much more.
Oh, totally. I think it, like I said right at the top of the show, it's one of the most evocative imagery or evocative idols that you could use or work with or see or whatever, you know. And when you look at some of the imagery that's out there that's got skulls in it, it brings so many different aspects and perspectives to it. And you know, and even today in occult work or, you know, spiritual work, a skull is a communication tool of divination. It's a focal point for ritual work. And, you know, when you look at various cultures around the world, even gathering heads, shrunken heads, there are so many different angles you can go down. But we wanted to look at the screaming skulls in the UK because they are specific to the UK. We couldn't find any elsewhere.
And that is interesting. And it's good to have something we can call our own.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. It's ours. No one else is having them.
Nobody else is having our screaming skulls. We like our screaming skulls. But when you look across the globe, you know, you've got so many different... the skull is so important in so many different cultures and is worshipped. Great festivals are built around these. In Munich, there's a big mass procession to do with skulls. It's just crazy when you start looking into the whole topic. It's a massive, massive topic when we started looking at this. And it's like, we've referenced certain things like the Paris catacombs and the skull chapels that you can find around those are mainly in Europe more than anything else. It shows the importance of the symbology to do with skulls and how integral that is to our cultural psyche.
Yeah.
On that note, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're actually going to delve a little bit more into the crystal side of things. We'll be right back after this.
Hello, Harry Price here. If there's nothing me and my friends enjoy more here on the other side, it is to sit back and relax and listen to the Paranormal Concept Show, right here on the PAUK Radio Network. Broadcasting a plethora of interesting and informative content for all your paranormal needs. Find them across social media to keep up to date with forthcoming shows and all their other adventures. Hello, is there anybody there?
And welcome back to the second half of the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Now, this week we are delving into the big bad world of skulls, and we looked at the legends and myths surrounding screaming skulls in the first half, and now we're going to embrace something a little bit closer to home for me, which is the crystal skull side of things. Crystals, boys.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, big rocks.
No, I do like a
soul.
crystal. I do like crystal skulls. Since knowing you, Kerry, and seeing some of the ones you get, they are quite cute.
I mean, the ones I get, to be fair, are mass-produced. I'm not going to make no bones about that. They are mass-produced these days.
Pardon the pun, yeah?
But there are certain crystal skulls that are massive. They're big, beautifully carved quartz skulls that are out there. They're well known. We've seen them. But the legend of the crystal skull is something that kind of sings to my Paul's soul. With one of, and actually all of us, it captures the imagination, doesn't it? Because we've seen it. Oh, hello, I'm banging things around now. In films and whatnot, Indiana Jones and the.
It has aspects of everything, and as you say, Kerry, Indiana Jones, so Paul will be all over this. For me, sort of like Mysteries of Atlantis and Lost Civilizations. I mean, that really gets me going. That floats my boat.
Exactly, because there's lots of other theories, not just like aliens either.
No.
There was one theory about the Atlanteans. Go into that a little bit later.
You certainly will, because this is a legend that crosses many cultures yet again, and it's the crystal skulls. It goes from the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Native Americans, various indigenous people around the world. Oh, even, like you've already said, Atlanteans, Lemurians. That's more in the philosophical and metaphysical world.
Yeah.
And these legends are passed down. The legend of a crystal skull, and it is fascinating when you start delving into it, but the more we delved into it, the more we were like, weren't we?
Yeah.
Yes. We sort of come up, and plus, as we sort of had to admit to ourselves, it can be very confusing as well, can't it? Because there's particularly three main skulls, isn't there? Which there seems to be a lot of similarities between their stories and stuff, and it can get pretty confusing which one is which.
Very much so, very much so. Now, for me, the iconic imagery of a crystal skull is obviously the opening sequence of Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World. We spoke about that a few weeks ago.
Yes.
And that is supposed to be the Mitchell Hedges skull, which is a legend all into itself. We'll come to that in a bit, is what we'll do. But the general legends regarding the indigenous cultures all tend to be around the number 13. 13 skulls, 13 crystal skulls when brought together will be a time of awakening and a massive download for the awakening of human consciousness, right?
Yes.
Basically.
Mm-hmm.
And according to a Native American, the skulls were kept inside a pyramid in a formation of tremendous power known as the Ark. And the Ark was comprised of the 12 skulls from each of the sacred planets, kept in a circle, and the 13th skull would be in the middle of the formation. And all the skulls are the collective consciousness of all of the worlds. And when they join up, they will link all the knowledge of all the sacred planets in one place.
And that's what
Dun,
the basis.
dun, dun.
That's the basis of the Indiana Jones movie.
Based on a real legend that has been passed down from, indigenous cultures across the globe.
Yeah, I'm very interested in the number 13. I know it sort of does have a numerological sort of like an attributes and attributed to it, and this does, from my sort of standpoint, it does sort of ring a bit of sort of like a solar cult around this, sort of being the 12 signs of the zodiac, with the 13th being the sun in the middle and everything revolving around it, and the zodiac containing knowledge and stuff like that. I mean, your sort of explanation there, Kerry, earlier, sort of jumped out at me when you said that. I thought, this sounds familiar.
We don't even know if we've got one skull of this, though.
No, that's 13, right.
And so it's a legend. It's not anything tangible, and that's the problem with this, isn't it? If these skulls are real, then you would have thought at some point at least one would have been found by now. Some argue one has been found, but, well, like I say, we'll come on to that in a bit. Now, it is very different. This perspective of the crystal skull is very different, because there's prophecies and all sorts. Right now, I'm going to read you the prophecy. This is a Mayan priest shamanic prophecy type thing, and it says, the prophecy says, now is the time of the awakening. This is your job now to awaken. The veil of 9 hells is past, and the time of warning has now arrived. It is time to prepare for the age of the 13 heavens. The time of 12 Bacton and 13 Ahor is fast approaching, and they shall be here among you to defend Mother Earth. The prophecy says, let the dawn come. Let all the people and all the creatures have peace. Let all things live happily. For the love must not only be between humans, but between all living things. We are the children of the sun. We're the children of time. We are the travellers in space. May all the songs awaken. May all the dancers awaken. May all the people and all things live in peace. For you are the valleys. You are the mountains. You are the trees. You are the very air you breathe. Now is the time of return of the grandmothers and grandfathers. Now is the time of the return of the elders. Now is the time of the return of the wise ones, and the wise ones are all of you. Now is the time to go out into the world and spread the light. The sacred flame has been kept for this purpose, and now the time approaches when you will be required to love all things, to love a world that has gone crazy, to rebalance the heavens and the earth, for the time of warning has come to pass, and the warriors of the rainbows are now beginning to be born. The veil of tears, the 9 of hells is over, and it is now time to prepare for the 13 heavens. The ancestors are returning, my brothers and sisters, and we do not have long. Now is the time that prophecies will be fulfilled. And this, the 13 heavens, is a reference to the 13 skulls. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Read that prophecy as you will. It kind of makes sense.
It does, but I'm going to say, but it was written by man. Time is a man-made concept. If we're supposed to believe that this is aliens, they're not going to know what time is.
Or they've got their own concept.
Yeah,
well, they'd have their own concepts, but it wouldn't be called time, would it? That's a really huge assumption.
Yeah, but that prophecy that Kerry read out doesn't really it doesn't suggest aliens anyway in it. It just...
but it uses the word time quite a lot. And as I said, time is a man-made concept, and it's guided by the fact that we're moving around the Earth, around the sun, and the Earth's revolving as well. So, time on each planet is going to be different anyway. So they must, if it is an alien sort of issue, then they've got to have some sort of universal time as opposed to a planetary time. So it wouldn't be time as we know it.
But you've got two different philosophies there, effectively. You've got a Native American philosophy and then a Mayan prophecy. You've got two different cultures basically talking the same thing. You know, 13 being the number, 13 being the key, you know, of coming together, all those 13 things coming together and creating this massive knowledgeable download from planetary forces, if you like. You know, it's a connection between not just us, but from us. But we need to be ready for that as a planet. We need to make that.
Yeah, there are other civilizations out there, obviously, that has a astrological outlook to their religion. I mean, even like the Norse, you know, they had the 9 realms. So their figure would be 9 as opposed to 13.
Yeah, I think if you strip any sort of religion down, it always does come down to some sort of solar aspect to it. I mean, that is basic religion. The basic concept of religion always seems to be solar in concept, which is quite easy to understand, really, because you would have run your life by the changings of the seasons and stuff, and what particular stars rise when. You would wait for them to rise to know, you know, it was a certain time of the year to go out and plant your crops and everything. So, and particularly with the Mayans, I think their concept of time was a lot different to what our concept of time is today. They had a cyclical calendar which run on something like a 25,000 year cycle. I mean, can you remember all that furore when 2012 came around?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was linked to the Mayan calendar.
But they said on that, it wasn't, because it was stated as like the end of the world, wasn't it? And, and now they've re-looked at that, and they think that was a misinterpretation. They think it was the end of an era, like an end of a time.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, a cycle.
Yeah, but, you know, the conspiracy theorists got hold of it, you know, and they loved it, you know, and distorted it all out of proportion.
Are you talking?
You could also interpret that.
Things, Richard.
Well, never. Me?
You could also interpret that to be like the COVID situation that we've got now, the pandemic. It's almost like a catalyst to a new way of life.
Or in regards to this, they said the time of warning is over, obviously, but maybe this is the time of warning. Maybe we are. Oh, ice cream, anybody?
Oh, yes, please. 99.
Well, that's it entirely. I mean, the whole warning thing would be the pandemic.
Yeah.
And now we have to change
how we do things.
How we live. I mean, it's been very noticeable, the environmental changes, and the whole COVID thing has, you know, helped the environment. So we want to keep that obviously going. So we're going to have to change the way we live.
Again, in all religions, I mean, and their sort of narrative does usually end in a time of tribulation before a rebirth. I mean, and even Christianity, you know, the Bible, you know, it's sort of like you have Revelation and all sorts of dreadful things are going to happen just before the Enlightenment comes, you know, the second coming, and it's all going to be sweetness and light after that. So again, and this is another sort of thing that seems to run along all different sorts of belief systems throughout time.
And like I say, we don't actually have. If this legend is true, the 13 skulls come together, the 13 crystal skulls come together. Now, you would have thought at some point we would have at least one of them, one verified kind of skull, but we haven't. When we looked into the skulls that we have got, none of them are verified as being particularly that old, really. No. You know, and tests have been done. I mean, the British Museum did a study which pointed the manufacture of most of the skulls. Now, nowadays, you can get crystal skulls everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And you can get some massive skulls. There's some fantastic carvers out there. Leandro is one of them. Leandro de Souza is a fantastic crystal skull scullery person. I don't know what the official term would be.
Yeah, crystal skull carver.
And he does some amazing carvings, incredibly expensive, but he does some amazing, massive ones. But they're modern. right? So what we're talking about here is if these skulls were born from a legend, they were real and it born a legend. These are old carved crystal skulls, so you would be able to tell, because obviously carving methods, we know that evolution of carving and polishing of these things. Do you know what I mean nowadays? So majority of I say majority, everything you see on the market is modern carved. You know, what I managed to source are all mass manufactured. They're not hand carved and hand polished. I'd love them to be, but I don't think, pretty damn sure that they're not. You know, and most of these are produced from Brazil, China, Germany, those kind of places. The interest from a metaphysical kind of side of it is in obviously the crystal it's made from, and also the belief system and the symbology that's linked to the skull, right? It's not the legend that is born out of the 13 skulls. There's a very distinct difference between the two.
It seems, not trying to put a dampener, I mean, we will discuss this more, it seems they've produced these skulls relatively modern times to fit this old legend. If you know what I mean.
Or they are out there, we just haven't discovered them yet. You know, because a legend doesn't get born that far back from nothing. No smoke without fire, right?
Yeah.
Or is it just people have assumed they're the crystal skulls?
Well, yeah, because in that prophecy you read out, it doesn't specifically state crystal skulls.
No.
People are assuming 13 heavens is an acronym for crystal skulls. It could not be.
Whereas the Native Americans specifically state the skulls. It's one of those, isn't it, right? You can overlay and maybe come up with 500 when it's actually only 2, you know. But this is something that's still very prevalent. It catches the imagination. As I say, it's born films and books and God knows what out of it. But the skull itself, in regards to the Aztecs, was actually just a symbol of regeneration. That's what the skull represented to them. And like a professor of anthropology, Michael Smith, says he doesn't believe that they were supposed to have any specific powers. They were literally just a representation, an idol, in the same way as we have Jesus on the cross. He's not got any specific power. It's just an idol that you focus your worship toward.
Yeah, because on Aztec sort of carvings on their sort of monuments, there is a lot of skull iconography, a lot. So that doesn't suggest it's particularly rare. It was very common, you know, so which will point towards, you know, it was just an everyday sort of thing for them.
And we've already discussed how, you know, in the first half of the show, we've already looked at the symbology and the belief systems that link in the European era towards skulls. That's not going to be any different across the globe because it is such a powerful symbol of mortality, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you think about it, I mean, I think the other factor is if they are supposed to be sources of information, so when they're brought together, they release this information, and we have all this information coming down, and it links the consciousness of everything. It's got to have stored something in the crystal structure, yeah.
Well, I think that is the appealing part of crystal skulls, and everyone has a basic understanding that at least some form of crystals actually do, because we have them in our computers and stuff like that. They are sort of known to be processors. I mean, you know, and that sort of helps this along a lot, this sort of legend along a lot, especially in the modern era.
But what we have in computers and TVs and stuff like that is actually manufactured quartz, which is piezoelectrical quartz, which does occur naturally, but not all the time. So it would have to be that type of quartz to be able to hold information and to transmit that information. But the quartz skulls that they've studied, the 3 main ones that they've studied, are not that piezoelectrical quartz. They're just normal quartz. Okay. Now, that particular side, it's very scientific. When you start looking at it, it's incredibly scientific. Lots of equations, lots of safety glasses and white jackets and stuff to explain that. And we would have to It's probably take 2 hours to explain that in itself, and a hell of a lot of research, which I haven't got time for, quite frankly, or the mentality to do that. But basically, when you squeeze certain crystals, such as quartz, you can make electricity flow through them. This is very basic, missing out huge chunks, right? So if you pass electricity through the same crystals, they will squeeze by themselves, vibrate back and forth, and that's basically where piezoelectricity comes from. So it's transmitting and amplifying and being able to hold information and pour it out, basically. So that's in a nutshell. The skulls they've looked at haven't got that quality.
No.
And that is where the whole thing falls down, in my opinion. Because if they are the crystal skulls that are supposed to do this in the legend, then surely they would have to have that property to be able to transmit the information that's when they're all brought together for some reason. I don't know. You know what I mean? That in itself would be part of the scientific side of it that you would think. You go, well, hang on. It's got this ability. The quartz skull has actually got this piezoelectric ability to do it. Maybe there's something to it because it has that property. So if it hasn't got that property, then straight away it's not going to be able to do the transmitting of information that you want it to in the same way as we use it, like you said, in our tech.
Yeah, I think science has sort of, at least it's looked into it and it's came back with a quite a good explanation, and it doesn't fit.
No,
it doesn't fit the examples being.
Not on the skulls they've examined. But like I say, we may not have yet discovered the skulls that are needed for this.
Yeah. I mean, they're not going to be just placed anywhere so anyone can find them.
No.
Well, yeah, I mean...
They're not just going to be found on the side of a road.
No.
No.
Was it the Benson Hedges skull was tucked away, wasn't
Benson
it?
Hedges.
Yeah.
Mitchell Hedges. The fag
Benson
skull.
Hedges are fags, yeah. Cigarettes, the Americans.
We'll look at that how that plays out in a minute. But first of all, let's have a look at Max, the Houston skull. Now, this is the largest one, right? It's the Texas crystal skull. Otherwise, it's allegedly 36,000 years old. It was actually found in Guatemala. Was given to an indigenous healers, who then got it to an American healer, who became the Red Hat Lama in Tibetan Buddhism. He then gave it to a lady called Joanne Parks because her daughter was really ill. She had bone cancer, and she reckons that it extended the life of her younger daughter by 3 years.
Okay.
After that, she put it in the closet, in a box.
Like you do.
As you do.
Yeah, it could just be one of those placebo things.
Possibly.
Yeah.
But a belief system then becomes in it.
Yeah.
Since we worked with this skull, this then happened, blah, 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 right? And Mrs. Park says, and this was in a telephone conversation with The Edge, she said, it kind of telepathically spoke to me in dreams, and she thought she was going a bit crazy. That rock over there in that closet is talking to me. So she got to the closet, she could feel the energy pulling at her, and she said, you haven't, and she couldn't find it initially, but then she dug a bit further in the closet. She must have had a very big closet, is all I'm saying. And she found...
Wonder if she found Narnia.
Yeah.
Let's hope it wasn't her underwear drawer. If it was that big, she couldn't find it.
And so she found it, and she said, I'm going to put you downstairs in the other closet. But she reckons that was the first time that the skull was actually trying to connect with her.
Right.
Now,
anecdotal, isn't it?
The skull allegedly was telling her to find a particular man who could shed light on its significance. And funny enough, she happened to turn the television on one morning in 1987, and the show was called Good Morning Houston, and there was another skull, and she thought, oh, another talking skull. Now, the programme actually featured a group from the UFO Contact Centre in Arizona who had 50 objects in the van, and basically we're going to have a look at a couple of the objects, and one was an Egyptian bust, one was a crystal skull. She called the station and said, I've got one of them, thanks very much. And it was given to me by this monk and allegedly came from Central America. They were all over this. you can imagine, can't you?
Well, yeah.
Particularly with the legends surrounding it, because obviously it does tie into aliens and ufology, right? And they straight away went to her. They were like, "You've got this skull. We're coming to have a look at it," right?
Yeah.
And they were joking and whatnot. And they said, she goes, "Look what she has in a box in the closet." And they actually said to her, "You don't know what you've got, do you?" And she was like, "No, that's why I called you." So they took it to the Houston Museum, and they acknowledged that she's got something rare. To be fair, she has. It's a big crystal skull. They are, back in these days, they were quite rare, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, not everyone's got a crystal skull in the... and maybe skeletons, but not the skulls.
They wanted to put it on display. She was like, "No, I'm going to take him home." Right? So she boxed him back up, took him back home, put him back in the closet. Right? As you do. She assumed at this point that she hadn't found the man that she needed to find. So her instinct is telling her that this isn't the right avenue for what Max is wanting.
Oh, right. So Max wasn't seeking fame and fortune then, obviously.
No.
Didn't want to go on display. Oh, no. No. Anyway, at this point, he told her that his name was Max.
Right.
So she was thinking, I've got a rock in a box, in a closet, that's talking to me, and he's just told me his name. Her husband must have thought, "What's going on with my wife?"
Oh, dear. Here she goes again. Away with the fairies.
Yeah.
Max kept on at her. This skull kept on at her. He told her to keep contacting the television station to find out the name of somebody who would know about crystal skulls. And in the end, she was told about a guy called Nick Nosserini of North Carolina, California.
Oh,
sorry.
Nick, yeah.
Good old Nick, right? Now, he is one of the world's foremost experts on crystal skulls. He actually passed away in 2004, by the way.
Okay.
But he is noted for being the only person in modern history to have worked and handled 9 human-sized crystal skulls.
Right.
Now, she did speak to Nick over the phone, and he declared, "You've got the skull with the white cap." Now, the white cap is a solid white portion of crystal on the side of Max's head, which is apparently where the original quartz crystal was growing. And Nosserino, whatever his name was, explained that with the white matrix on the top of the skull, it acts as an amplifier to all the other crystal pieces around it. So he's completely in belief system of this legend of the 13 skulls, right?
So that was basically its thinking cap.
Basically.
But he made this conclusion just for a telephone conversation.
Yeah. But he is an expert, so he does kind of know what he's talking about. If she had said no, there's no white cap there.
Well, yes, I can see that, but yeah, okay.
But Nick Nosserini had a boyhood vision, and his vision envisaged one master skull surrounded by 12 smaller skulls, and the master skull contained all the wisdom and information of the other 12.
So he wasn't a scientist per se, an academic expert. He was technically a believer beforehand.
Well, from a vision he got when he was a boy.
Yes.
Well, he had that initial belief, but then he'd studied it and become an expert.
It makes me wonder if that's where the legend or the myth of the 13 skulls coming together comes from.
Yes.
I would love to know for definite. I mean, we've talked about the Native American guy. Where did he get that legend from? Did he get that from reading something that Nick Nosserino put out there? It would be interesting to me.
Yeah.
We would have to look into that a little bit deeper, I feel. But it does make me wonder if, because Nick started this 65 years ago and he died in 2004. So that you're going back quite a lot of years.
Yeah.
If you see what I mean.
That would be a good research project, that. Yeah, sort of.
It does make me wonder if that is where the original legends start from, or whether it is actually an ancient legend or not. So now we're starting to call into question even the original folklore, cultural, legends and myths that are supposed to surround this. Straight away, we've got this just coming out of one of the skulls, doubt being cast on the origin of the myth and legend of the 13 skulls.
Yeah.
Strange, isn't it?
Interesting.
Now, in 1996, Nick Nocerino was invited to the British Museum to participate in a scientific authenticity examination. And amongst the skulls examined were the Smithsonian crystal skull, that actually arrived anonymously in 1992, the British Museum skull, which was once known as the Aztec skull, but actually was acquired from Tiffany's in 1897, Max, and a crystal skull, Shah-Na-Ra, named in memory of a shaman healer. Now, that was discovered in 1995 in an archaeological dig in Mexico. Okay?
Right.
Yep.
Funny enough, that particular skull was actually found in a location that Mr. Nocerini had intuitively found and asked someone to dig there.
He does seem to be driven more by his belief system than the science.
Yeah, but then that's pretty accurate. If he said, like, oh, I've dreamt that it's in that location, can you go and dig? And then they dug and they found it, then it's...
But it's anecdotal, isn't it? Yeah,
it gives a bit of credibility to his initial, doesn't it?
Bearing in mind, we know that a lot of skulls were produced in Germany and actually migrated across to that area.
Yeah. Produced by German migrants in that area as well.
Exactly.
And there was a lot of German migration out to South America during the late 19th, early 20th century.
Yeah, but how would he know that it's buried or anything there?
He's only got his word for it, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have.
So it's either gives credibility to his claim, or they actually put it there in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, again, this is the sort of the problem with these types of sort of stories. You have to be for a believer. It would be, oh yes, you would sort of like accept it, saying, well, he dreamt it, and sort of this is what happened.
But
for
then,
someone,
if he did put it there, what was the point? Because he could have just said, "Look what I found."
I mean, people do stuff like this. They do try and further their reputation by faking stuff, and this can't be discounted.
No.
Well, again, yeah, maybe he just give it a bit more thought and thought, well, if I get someone else to discover it, that gives me credibility. So maybe that's yeah.
And also it gives my intuitiveness and my boyhood vision credibility.
Yeah, credibility, yeah.
Yeah, but then maybe that just gives a little bit more credence to the conspiracy theorists then, doesn't it?
Who knows, right? But you can see where things go down, can't you? They examined these skulls, the skulls microscopically, to determine whether any marks existed, right? So whether they were carved with contemporary tools. Now, it was determined that the Smithsonian crystal skull and the British Museum skull were carved with contemporary equipment. So they were definitely Germany carved skulls.
Yeah.
They can pinpoint those, right? Because of the way it was carved. Nothing else, just the way it was carved. When they got to Max and the skull called Shah-Na-Ra, they wouldn't comment.
Right.
Okay.
So quite possibly now we've got 2 skulls, down from 4.
Possibly. They said no comment. Mr. Nocerini noted that while some deny testing ever took place on those 2 skulls, see, again, we've now got doubt. We don't even know if they were definitely tested. There was no comment on them, so does that mean they didn't get around to testing those? They sort of dismissed it because the first 2 they'd looked at were already dismissed. Did they run out of funding? Who knows, right? But they, there's denying that testing ever took place on those 2 skulls, so no evidence of modern tool marks could be found because they didn't test them. But Mrs. Park said research by Dr. Robert Schultz of Boston University indicated that the crystal that formed Max was grown very deep in the earth with 5 separate crystals overlaid to form the skull. No one's denying that the skull isn't crystal. That's the point. All they've done there is prove that it is actually a crystal. They haven't proved anything more than that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know much about sort of like crystals. You probably know this, Kerry. Is it possible to do sort of the crystals like quartz? Can you sort of analyse them from being mined or from certain areas, sort of certain strains of quartz, or is it all pretty much the same worldwide?
No, there are differences in quartz.
No, there are differences.
Yeah.
If you watch like Oak Island and shows like that, you'll often see when they pick out metals out of the ground, they get them tested and they can pinpoint exactly what mines they come from.
Yeah.
I can't see why these scientists haven't conducted those tests to actually, surely, and that would be the first thing they would do.
But the owners of the skull have to allow that to happen.
Not only that, it's money as well.
Yeah.
Because if they've only got enough money to test one skull and the others are pretty much identical, you test one skull and you're just naturally, because of money.
That would go a long way to determining at least where the quartz that the skull is made from is, from.
Yeah,
Not
I mean, if you've got spare,
because there's a lot of movement with crystals. You
True.
know, you wouldn't
if
necessarily.
you've got spare £130 million, I'm sure you can test them all.
Yeah.
But if you're sort of claiming a skull is sort of, sort of 300,000 years old or whatever, which some of these claims are, surely, and it's been said it's found in South America, and they analysed it and found that the original source was Germany. So, I mean,
I understand what you're saying, but I will also go with, you can dig up quartz. It's quite an abundant material, right?
Yeah.
But just where the quartz has been found, which the quartz itself is going to be very old to actually be a formation itself, Mother Earth, kind of old, right? Send that to the place where they carved them, i.e. maybe Germany. You can maybe prove where the quartz came from originally, but not where it was carved or date the carving. Yeah. And that's the bit that's important, not the fact that it's quartz or not. It is quartz.
Yeah.
They know it's quartz, but whether or not it was carved and being part of this legend is a different story completely, isn't it?
Yeah,
now,
but they'd need to
get
the microscope for that, wouldn't they?
But you've also got to consider there's a lot of money involved in this. Max still does tours. It's huge on the metaphysical front. It does tours and it's on display, and you can, go and meditate with it and do things with it and stuff like that if you've got the right amount of cash to do it.
Have you had an afternoon with Max?
I haven't. I haven't. The last time I knew Max was in the UK was in Scotland. It came to a place in Scotland, and it was in a big conference hall kind of thing, and it was a lot of money to attend the conference, to view and stuff like that. It is no disrespect to the owner. It's worth money. For him, it's worth keeping linked to that legend, not disproving that legend. And that's the problem, isn't it? And because it's privately owned, and and I don't mean any disrespect to the owner, because at the end of the day, regardless of what you want, it's the largest crystal skull that we've, carved skull, other than the mass-produced one that we've got with unknown origins, effectively, that people link to, and they do get stuff. You do get people that take strange photographs when they've photographed with Max, and have had information received from working with the skull in a meditative state. And I've read account after account of people that have had that opportunity and have come away. You could argue that's belief system, but it's one of those, isn't it? It's one of those. Is it belief system, or is that skull actually doing something? Does it actually have a property that people are linking into?
It's interesting to note that the two skulls that were sort of said that were sort of like not fakes, but sort of modern reproductions were already in institutions, and they were accessible and stuff. But the skulls that are still in debate are the ones in private hands.
And that's because they've not been looked at.
Yeah, that's right. So
in depth.
I mean, with the use of quartz crystal, Kerry, you'll be able to tell us this. Isn't quartz crystal almost like a focus for energy, and it focuses energy?
That's the belief system in that. And like I say, there is the piezoelectricity factor scientifically that you can account to with quartz, but not all quartz has that same property, as it were. But
and I think
it has been overlaid on basically every quartz.
That's it. And I think the mere fact that as well as a skull, people almost like look into the eyes, and that's when they get the focus of energy.
I have to say, having worked with mass-produced skulls, they are very different to working with like a raw skull. I work with crystals quite a lot, and there is a very big difference. I knew I had to have that amethyst skull that I got the other night at Kelvedon, and I have a carnelian skull as well that literally I bought through my wholesaler with a view to sell. Yeah? And yet the minute I opened the package, I knew it was mine.
Yeah.
And at various times, if I'm working on a thing, and this is where it sounds weird, I could be sitting here at my desk working away on whatever it is I'm working on, and then I'm getting, bring it forward. And the skull wants to sit with me while I'm working. And it's the strangest feeling. It's very hard to explain without sounding crazy. It's very, very hard to explain. There is a definite energy with crystal skulls that you don't get. You get other things with other crystal formations and raw crystals and carved crystals and stuff like that. But the crystal skull carvings are very unique to work with. There is definitely something about them. And that's all I can put it down to. It's very different.
Yeah, I've noticed with some of your clients when they've purchased skulls, sort of like, and they're always very pleased with them, aren't they? They seem to have a natural sort of take, and they take to them almost immediately. And even when you sell them on your live streams, people, they are probably would you say the most popular sort of item you sell?
No, I wouldn't say they're the most popular, but they are popular. They were not the most popular, because different things hit at different times, and skulls are very particular. I mean, I sold a fluorite skull, and the owner, the guardian now of that skull, said it winked when I was showcasing it winked at her, and she knew that was the moment it winked at her. She went, I've got to have it. This girl normally resonates with amethyst every single step of the way. It'll be amethyst, amethyst, amethyst. Whereas this fluorite, I was so shocked she went for the fluorite, but she went, as soon as I saw him, I knew he was mine. And it was exactly the same when I opened the box with all the other crystals. This carnelian skull came out, and I was like, it's mine. And I'm quite resilient to that, because obviously I've got hundreds of crystals, and hundreds of crystals pass through my hands. But for one to go, I'm yours, I'm not moving on, it says a lot.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And as I say, because I've dealt with crystals for a long, long time, I listen when they tell me stuff. You know what I mean? And I don't get a connection with every crystal that passes through my hands, but when a specific crystal comes to you or you see it, you've got to have it. And it will wait as well. A crystal, I've seen that before. Someone said, I love it, I just haven't got the funds right now. It'll, in next month or in a couple of months, if I've got the money, then I'll be back for it. And then in a couple of months, I go, have you got it? I go, yeah, I have. They go, it's waited for me. And it's right. It's just right. It's really strange how it works. But it does happen like that. So I can't personally just take out the spiritual, metaphysical side of this for me, having worked with it. But the science is not backing up the legend at the moment.
No.
And that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, let's have a look at the Mitchell Hedges skull, because we're running out of time, and I don't want to not cover the Mitchell Hedges, because this has got legends within itself, right? Now this came out from an archaeological dig, right?
Yeah.
Anna Mitchell Hedges was with her father on an expedition at the lost city of Lubantum.
Not Benson and Hedges, no.
Not Benson and Hedges, no.
Lubantum, yeah.
So they're on an archaeological dig at this place, and she reckons she climbed to the highest pyramid and saw a flash in a hole that led down. They lowered her into the hole, this young girl, they lowered her down into the hole, and she brought up this skull.
Yeah. It happened to be on her birthday as well, apparently, wasn't it?
Yeah.
What a present that is.
Now, to be fair, it was found in two parts.
Yeah, it took them a while to find the jawbone, didn't it?
That's right. And that was actually 25 feet away from where she found the top part of the skull, right? But she brought up the top part of the skull. And amazingly carved skull.
I think this is the skull that a lot of people will be familiar with, won't it? And sort of like photos and stuff, particularly as you pointed out earlier. It opened Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, so everyone got to see it at least once a week.
And what's interesting about this one is it has got the detachable jawbone on the bottom, which very few do. Most of them are a single carved piece, whereas this has got a movable jaw at the bottom. Right, so that's what makes it very unusual in itself, because you can imagine that's probably quite fragile if it's been buried in a temple underneath an altar and has got separated from its jaw at 25 feet away. How did it not get broken is kind of a thing, and I don't know.
Yeah,
it's one of those, isn't it?
Mayan ruins are very notable for when they are dug to have very, very few artifacts, if any. You know, this is one of the great mysteries of the Mayan ruins. They very rarely find anything. And this sort of, it sounds too good to be true.
It does. Now, there are differing accounts on this, because in Mitchell Hedges' 1954 autobiography, he reports, "How the skull came into my possession, I have reasons for not revealing." Now, this is a fantastical way of finding it. My daughter, top of the cliff, top of the pyramid, looked down, something glinted, something pretty. We lowered her down. You'd think that would be something he would want to talk about, because it happens in an archaeological dig. But in his autobiography, he says he has reasons for not revealing it. He also included that the object he labelled the sinister skull of doom is at least 3,600 years old and was allegedly used by the high priest of Maya when performing esoteric rituals. It is said that when he willed death with the help of the skull, death invariably followed. So you've got the legend of the Mitchell Hedges skull straight away there. You've got how it allegedly was found and what he said in his autobiography about that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to find out where he got that quote from. As regards to the priest working, whether that is he made that up or whether it is a quote from from documented evidence from perhaps a temple wall somewhere or something like that.
However, when it was reprinted, they deleted all those references. So a year later, when they released it again, the autobiography, that reference was actually deleted.
Right.
And it is speculated that Mitchell Hedges was a secret agent and he kept the details hidden for that reason, right? Who knows? Who knows, right? And this is the problem we have, isn't it? It's because you get one thing said and something different and something else, and you know what I mean? It's just one of those, isn't it? Whatever way you look at it, this skull is an amazing piece of work.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, you can't deny that. I mean, you've got it. I mean, where it's from, or how it was made is subject to debate. But, there's no denying there is an object.
There is an object, but where it came from, how it was found, all that is very, very...
It is quite vague as well. Yes. Not vague and speculative. It's interesting it's brought up that he may have been a spy, like a secret agent. It was not that uncommon in the early part of the 20th century for the governments to approach scientists who worked abroad, particularly archaeologists and stuff, to sort of like gather more information of the places, the countries they were working in. Just a little sort of tidbit there for you.
But let's think about it in times like this, right? You've got, out of the skulls that we know, we've got Max, allegedly came from some form of, indigenous Mexican thing, given to a healer, an American healer who ended up giving it to Joanne Parks, ended up in a closet. The Smithsonian skull, anonymously donated.
Yep.
The British Museum skull, bought at Tiffany's. Where that came from originally, we don't know.
No. Well, it might be a clue.
Tiffany's.
Tiffany's Jewellers, isn't it? Jewellery, isn't it? You know.
No, it's an auction house, Tiffany's.
Oh, is it? I thought it was.
As well, yeah, it is a jewellers, but there is an auction house linked to that too.
Mm.
And then you've got the Benson. See, I'm at it now. The Mitchell Hedges. The Benson Hedges skull. We renamed it now on the Paranormal Concept Show. The Mitchell Hedges skull, which is surrounded in mystery of how it was found and where it was found and how it was discovered. And one thing says one thing, another thing says another, and no one's admitting to anything really. But again, huge amount of money involved with this one, right?
Yeah.
So out of all the crystal skulls we're looking at, there is nothing defined. 2 of those have been examined and discounted kind of as modern because of the contemporary markings, carving markings on them. And the 2 that we really want to kind of get our grubby little mitts on are privately owned collectors, and they make a lot of money out of.
Yeah.
Yeah. I find it strange as well, sort of a bit coincidental, that sort of like the real sort of stories of these crystal skulls, especially the metaphysical side, the spiritual sort of side of the stories, really came to prominence. There's not much sort of record of them before sort of like the late 19th, again, early 20th century. But this is when the Theosophical movement really got going, and they sort of made some pretty wild claims about everything that sort of went back to the ancient masters and stuff like that, so there could be a touch of that involved as well.
There could be. There are several theories as to where it came from originally. Some, they're dating it around the 14th, 15th century. One hypothesis is that it was roughly sculpted in one era, modified in another, so that could be why it's turned into what it is and why there's little damage on it. Another person says it could be as old as 12,000 years old, but you can't prove that. I think to hand polish a piece like that would take some doing. But then I can't discount that either, because look at some of the other artifacts that have come out. You look at some of the Chinese workmanship that came out in some of the, dynasties far back in time.
Oh, like the porcelains and stuff like that.
Things like that, you can't. Can you discount it? Maybe it was Chinese in origin. Who knows?
I think the problem with crystal skulls is sort of like what some people and attribute to them is the sheer age some people claim they are, which is quite you sort of look at it logically. I mean, it's quite fanciful. They're sort of hundreds of thousands of years old, and stuff like that. And even I find it difficult to get my head around that concept.
There is even a legend that the skull, this is the Benson Hedges skull, the Mitchell Hedges skull, was actually brought back from the Holy Land by the Knights Templar during the Crusades. And it was
I knew they were getting on it.
Oh, I know, right? Paul's all over this one. The skull was then supposedly kept in their inner sanctum in London and later hidden. And that Mitchell Hedges actually rediscovered it when he was dealing in antiques. So he didn't actually find it on an archaeological dig, and his daughter wasn't lowered down a pyramid. And that's just a nice story to add weight to this beautiful skull. It's just, who knows, right? But then the Knights Templar seem to get blamed for a lot of artefacts.
Well, yeah, I mean,
missing artefacts, should I say?
I'd like to go into their storeroom. I mean, there'll be everything in there, won't there? Crystal skulls, the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail, you name it. They've got it.
They've got it, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, they were literally the first bank, weren't they? And a lot of people gave them special artifacts to look after.
Could you imagine, though, if you've got this skull, you could take it to the Knights Templar and say, right, how much is that worth? You've got to keep hold of it as collateral.
Yeah, because I think, the story that it was held in their sort of church in London, because it was, I believe because it's believed that the Knights Templar did venerate the head of John the Baptist, didn't they? And I believe that's a sort of connection they're trying to sort of... So even there, they're still trying to overlay some sort of mystical connection with the skull.
I think whatever way we want to look at this, it's it's a crazy thing to think, isn't it? That 13 skulls will come together and download a huge amount of knowledge and bring planetary knowledge to the Earth, and we need to be ready for that as a planet in our own right, and that these skulls are out there, but nothing we're coming up with is actually backing up that legend. And these skulls, although fantastic pieces of work, and the stories behind them are absolutely amazing in their own right, is crazy. But as I say, I go back to my spiritual roots on this. When I'm working with crystal skulls, modern carved crystal skulls, to this day, there is definitely something different about them. And it's everybody I know who owns a crystal skull would say the same. There's new carvings of skulls, crystal skulls coming out. So we've got dinosaur carving skulls, T-Rex crystal skulls.
Oh, right.
Now this is a new thing. They're absolutely freaking phenomenal. The carving in them is crazy. They're a lot of money, but they are something special. And people that have seen them are going, "That's mine." It's like, no matter how much money it is, they'll find in the money for them because they are that phenomenal. Have to say, I was rather tempted just as a little magpie moment, and I thought, no, I haven't got that kind of money, just for a magpie moment. But other people were going, I've got to have it.
Just out of interest, how much do they retail for, like a human-sized one, modern one?
Thousands.
Thousands? You're better off buying yourself a real human one, then.
Depends on your theory of working with crystals, doesn't it?
Yeah, true.
You know, I mean, you can get, like the alien from the film.
Yeah.
You can get crystal carvings in that, big carvings in that.
So
and they're thousands and thousands of pounds. And people will buy them. People have them.
Yeah, of course they will.
I think, yes, and especially with crystal skulls, and when I look at your ones, Kerry, you have in your stock, and even though they're small, I'm always fascinated on how they carve them, of how they do it, because I know a bit about engineering and sort of I've worked on lathes and stuff like that, and I don't know a great deal about sort of minerals and stuff like that, but I sort of look at them and they do sort of trick your mind into thinking, how did they do it? Even the modern ones, which have been carved. I mean, I look at them and I think, have they been moulded? The only way I can think they do is they mould them, but you can't mould them.
No, it's diamond. Yeah, but think of how they would they facet diamonds.
Yeah.
And they can carve diamonds into facets, can't they?
Yeah.
But even with that, even with something like that, the carver, a good carver this is, of diamonds, they won't just take a diamond start. They work with the actual raw
they have
diamond
it in their possession for
ages
for months, don't they?
and examine it with eyeglasses to get the right fractions and to find the right cut in there. And they work with the raw crystal to find the form that needs to come out of it before they start carving.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah,
it's a skill. It's an absolutely amazing skill. But there must be it must be some form of diamond carve, like, I don't know, tool or something.
Yeah.
Because it's the hardest mineral, isn't it, diamond?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It must be something like that. I don't know off the top of my head myself. Whatever way you want to look at it, crystal skulls in general, are absolutely phenomenal pieces of folklore and mythology and mystery and all those things that we love in the little paranormal field, right?
Oh, it has everything, doesn't it?
It does have everything. We haven't even covered elongated skulls or stuff like that, because there's a whole mythology surrounding
and
those.
As for popular culture, you can even get a skull emoji on your Facebook Messenger.
Yes, you can. On that note, we've actually come to the end of the show. If you want to go over and read any of our work, we write blogs, and all of our show links are on paranormalconcept.com. Correct?
Yep, that's correct. Well done.
I know. Post-it note at the ready, all I'm saying.
And you can take that one off now.
Until next week. And we are going to try and get a metaphysical person, like a spiritual person, who works closely with Skulls to give us his perspective on it for a future show. So watch this space. We haven't quite finished with the skull subject just yet.
No, we've still got elongated skulls and all the others to go yet.
Yeah, I know, right? It's still a whole area left to discover with this one. On that note, say goodbye, guys.
Goodbye, guys.
Goodbye, guys.
For businesses around the world, today isn't a restart, it's a rethink. That's why they're partnering with IBM. Retailers are keeping their systems up as millions of orders move online. Call centers are using IBM Watson to manage customer questions with AI. And solutions built on the IBM cloud are helping patients receive trusted information. Today we're rethinking how business moves forwards. Let's put smart to work. Visit ibm.com/smart/UK to learn more. For businesses around the world, today isn't a restart, it's a rethink. That's why they're partnering with IBM. Retailers are keeping their systems up as millions of orders move online. Call centers are using IBM Watson to manage customer questions with AI. And solutions built on the IBM cloud are helping patients receive trusted information. Today we're rethinking how business moves forwards. Let's put smart to work. Visit ibm.com/smart/UK to learn more.